Well, a month or two goes by, she doesn't get around to selling her shares, and now those 10,000 shares are worth like $5,000 because there's some heat coming into the Yahoo. And she says to Eric, I have to sell these shares. I mean, $5,000 is a lot of money. He said, do what you want. I'm not selling my shares. You want to sell your shares, go ahead. She still doesn't sell her shares. Now, fast forward a couple months, her 10,000 shares are worth $50,000. And she's freaking. I know her, and I know she was living hand to mouth, and she's freaking. She said, Eric, I've never had this much money in my life. Do what you want, he tells her. I'm not selling my shares. You want to sell your shares, go ahead. Fast forward another year. Her shares are now worth $1 million. She eventually cashes in the million. And, of course, the nice ending to the story, Barbara Ryder is now Barbara Hippo. They got married. I guess he didn't sell any of his shares. And, by the way, I've spent a lot of time on his gigantic yacht traveling around. So he didn't know either. He couldn't say to her, don't sell your shares, because sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, as you know, things are foggy until you look back with 20/20 hindsight. So, okay, why do we underperform? My number one reason I think people underperform their potential is they disconnect from their passion. I think too many of us, and this would be true of me at times, we go for maybe the gold before we go for something that's fundamentally important to us. Something that has intrinsic, not extrinsic, but intrinsic value. Maybe nobody in this room, but the entrepreneurs that I've observed who come to me for advice, some of them are just in it because, you know, they want the golden road, the golden yellow brick road or whatever. I'm a firm believer that if you disconnect from your passion, you'll never, ever achieve your potential. I learned about passion when I was a young guy. Grew up, as I mentioned, in Sandusky, Ohio. Actually grew up in a little suburb of Sandusky called Perkins, Ohio, which is a farm town with nothing in it. Not a stoplight, not a stop sign, not a grocery store, nothing, except there was a one gigantic building in Perkins, Ohio, an armory. And in that armory, the Ohio National Guard would come and they would march around on occasion. And then maybe once a year, there'd be some big event in this armory because it was so gigantic. It was, I'm going to say, 200,000 square feet, just this gigantic big armory. In 1965, I'm 14 years old, 13 or 14 years old, there's a concert scheduled for the armory February 1965. And some up-and-coming musicians traveling across the United States in a bus are planning to come to the Perkins Township Armory. They advertise a couple weeks in advance. They set up 1,000 chairs like these, gigantic amplifiers, build a little stage. The night of the concert, again, 1,000 chairs set up. The bus arrives about 5 o'clock. The concert's supposed to start at 8 p.m. At 6 p.m., gigantic snowstorm. Huge road-stopping, blocking, gridlocking snowstorm. The bus is there, the musicians are all there ready to perform, but nobody can get to the armory except me and about 3 of my farm boy buddies who are within walking distance of the armory. So we walk to the armory, and there's 1,000 chairs set up, and the 3 or 4 of us. We sit in the front row, of course, and out come the musicians, one after another. There were like 7 or 8 different performers or groups. And they cannot, the promoter says, we got to go on, the show's got to go on. They cannot get off the stage fast enough because it's so incredibly awkward. 1,000 chairs, big amplifiers, and 3 or 4 farm boys sitting in the front row. It's just amazingly awkward. So they all rush off the stage until the last performer. Who here, please help me, has heard of Tom Jones? Okay, thank goodness. Tom Jones, this young Welshman, just starting out in his career, who's heard of his big starting hit, his big hit, What's New, Pussycat? Okay, it's embarrassing, but some of you remember that song. He belts out What's New, Pussycat like he's at Caesar's Palace. There are 3 or 4 of us sitting in the front row. That's it in the whole place. And there's nothing to deaden the sound. The room is shaking, shaking, shaking. He leaves the stage. We stand up, give him a standing ovation, of course. And that night as I'm walking back home, it hits me as a 13-year-old, I'm thinking, holy cow, this guy really, really loves what he's doing. He would do it for free. He would do it no matter if there was a snowstorm and nobody there. He'd go out and sing to the cleanup crew. And that's what I think is a big disconnect for some entrepreneurs. They disconnect with what they really fundamentally feel strongly about. So I ask when I'm giving these speeches around the country, you know, do you feel strongly about what you're doing? Because if not, it may be an impediment, a barrier to your full potential. Number two, and you all know this because I understand most of you are entrepreneurs, you got to work really, really hard if you want to maximize your potential as an entrepreneur. Really hard. Now, what's hard mean? Most of you, if I asked, is a 40-hour work week hard? I would say probably not for an entrepreneur. 50? 60? I don't know. I don't know where the line is. Nobody knows. But I know that you got to, I believe, in my opinion, work to the edges of your physical and mental ability to function well and to perform well. I think a startup business or a growing business just consumes your time and energy. And if you're not willing to throw yourself in with that kind of commitment, again, in my judgment, you'll never reach your potential. There's a great quote. Pablo Picasso said this. Let me pull that out. Picasso said, oh, I'm taking Russell's book here. Picasso said, let me get his quote. Here it is. I don't know when the inspiration will come, but I want to be sure that when it does, I'm working. And it's the same thing when you're an entrepreneur. When you're an entrepreneur, you don't know what's going to be the next little break, the next clue, the next piece of information, the next investor you meet, the next potential customer you can pull together. So if you're not 24/7 into it with your heart and soul and everything you have in you, you're probably not going to achieve your potential. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just asking you to reflect back on, is this something that you're giving every ounce of your physical and mental ability to? Number three, I'm going to look at my notes to make sure I get number three right. But number three is, do you fundamentally believe? Do you fundamentally believe that you're entitled to huge success? Do you think in your heart of hearts, when you're in your bedroom all alone and nobody else to talk to, that you're entitled to Bill Gates kind of success? Or do you think Gates or Jerry Yang or Steve Jobs are somehow special, somehow different than you are? And we all have self-doubt. That goes with the territory. But relative to your own particular business or challenge or endeavor, do you really think you got the right stuff? And you got to answer yes, or you never achieve your potential. And it's not enough just to nod, yeah, of course I do. You got to fundamentally really believe it. A lot of people who've made great successes, we've studied in preparing our book, The Skinny on Success, we've studied a lot of people who made it against the odds, who became great successes when any odds maker would look at them and say, not a chance. We looked at Phil Knight, the guy who started Nike. We looked at, I think this is a wonderful example, Richard Branson, the English billionaire who started Virgin. Branson got into business for himself. He started a magazine when he was in the equivalent of our high school. He was 15 years old. He starts a magazine. He starts selling ad space in this magazine called Student. And he says, his quote, I'll paraphrase it for you, is, I was too young to know any better. The sheer absurdity of what I was doing caused me to just go forward because I didn't contemplate failure was an option.